back to the gamecocks.com podcast, the official podcast of gamecocks.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb, joined by Alan, and hey, it's August. It's football season.
It is.
Right?
There's a game this month, technically, 31st.
That's true. It doesn't much feel like football season down there, I assume, right now, but it will soon. So we're going to break down all you need to know about the South Carolina 2024 roster, some of the questions we have that we hope get addressed throughout the next month or so of preseason camp as you lead up to that opening game on August 31st, like you said, against Old Dominion. Today is the South Carolina Media Day, is what they call it, basically, where Beamer will speak, a couple assistants. I think you get some one-on-one time with different players and stuff.
Yep.
So Alan will be at that pretty soon after we log off this podcast. And then we'll have plenty of coverage on gamecocks.com from stuff that he gets from all of that. As far as the preseason schedule, I posted it on gamecocks.com the other day. There's like a couple of 15-minute media availability throughout the next week or so, where we'll try to fervorously write down who's standing where, and usually don't get a whole lot of
really good stretching and who only looks kind of good stretching.
That's right. Yeah. That said, you can get this person looks like they've lost some weight. This person looks like they put on some good weight. Maybe they'll do some walkthroughs, and it'll be curious to see who the first 5 offensive linemen are that line up, that sort of thing. But yeah, as always, those little media periods, they're not going to give away anything groundbreaking. But I think a mixture of that and reading between the lines of some of the after practice media availability we get over the next month should answer a lot of questions about what this team's going to be, which I know we both kind of have plenty of. And yeah, maybe that's where we will start, is what some of the biggest questions you have for this preseason camp. What are you hoping to learn before August 31st?
Yeah, I'm just going to start with something that it's one of those things I don't really have a reason to doubt, but I need to see it. Rocket Sanders still hasn't gone through a practice yet in the South Carolina uniform. He arrived injured from Arkansas from that torn labrum. He was on crutches when we first saw him at the basketball game when they introduced everybody in January. He was doing workouts and weight room stuff in the spring, but he didn't actually go through a spring practice. Obviously did not play in the spring game. Tomorrow will be the first time, we assume, Rocket Sanders has actually practiced in South Carolina. We've got 15 minutes or whatever tomorrow morning. I just want to see him out there, make sure that looks healthy, that looks the way it should. You're not going to know for sure. But I think getting a player that important just up to speed and through practices and kind of actually where it needs to be is as big of a story as anything in camp. Even though we've heard he's healthy, we just need to actually see it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, so much of what I think the offensive strategy is going to be built around is dependent somewhat on his health. Although I will say South Carolina definitely did a better job in the portal this offseason of building a little bit of depth compared to what they had last year.
Yeah.
You don't have, DeCarron Joyner trying to take running back snaps or whatever, Luke Doty or whoever had to move positions, Jaheim Bell a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that Vanderbilt game, he was starting running back.
So you at least have 3, I think, serviceable running backs and one really good one in Rocket Sanders, who's obviously former All-SEC, has a 1,400-yard season under his belt. If he's back to that point, then I think things get really interesting for you on offense. And we've already talked about how, throughout the offseason, and we'll probably talk about it more today, that our expectations are that the defense is going to be pretty good, probably the best of the Beamer era. So if those two things kind of come together, this season gets very interesting very quickly, I think.
Yeah, I'm with you completely. I think that's kind of my main question for the offense. What's you got a question you want or a couple? We'll just go back.
Yeah, I have a couple on the offensive side as well. I labeled this one, and this will be familiar to South Carolina fans during the Muschamp days. Is it possible we get McElwain or Nunez? And as no disrespect to those guys. I think Lorenzo Nunez actually is credited with a win down in Athens. So that get the number one team. So that was, he's got his moment in the sun or whatever. But what I mean by that is both those guys were pretty hyped before we saw them have to step into a starter role. And then once they stepped into a starter role, some of the flaws of, the grind of the SEC and, having the whole thing placed on their shoulders or whatever started to show through. I don't think that Lenore Sellers is going to fall into that trap, but I still think, the jury is somewhat out. And I wanted to at least play a little devil's advocate there because I think for the most part, we've been super hyped. I think optimistic. I still think that we're probably right to be optimistic, but we still don't really know beyond the little bit of game action and a spring game that we've seen of them, really.
Yeah, no, I think that's it kind of, in some way, everything kind of begins and ends right there, right? I mean, if you're going into a season with a quarterback who's never started a game before, I mean, that alone is different from the last 2 years. It's different from South Carolina for a while. You're not completely starting fresh because he did play some garbage time last year, but even that was only 3 games. Yeah, you're pretty much starting over at quarterback as much as you can be in modern college football, and I think that's fair a question as any to ask until you actually see it.
Yeah, and I mean, again, very excited. I think if he reaches his upside mixed with what we were just saying about Sanders, then wow, this offense could be really, really good. You brought in a Sean Elliott who has some run game concepts that have been proven to work throughout his career. In his first stint at South Carolina, he was run game coordinator, and we saw, that kind of came at the same time as Marcus Lattimore and Mike Davis. So, he definitely has some talent to work with, but he's got some talent to work with this year too. And I think, we're another question we might bring up is along the offensive line, but we expected it to at least take a little bit of a step forward. Last year, you had a lot of talent on the offensive line, but a lot of it was very young. You like to think that another year in the program and all of that, the corner starts to get turned a little bit there. So, yeah, I mean, lots of questions, but I guess reasons to be optimistic and reasons that you could talk yourself into this being a pretty good offense.
Yeah, I think you can talk yourself into it for sure. I'm going to move on for another one of my questions. I think there's just maybe one spot on this defense where you actually have a question mark, at least for who's going to take most of the reps, and that's that second corner spot. I think O'Donnell Fortune's probably going to be one of them. He's the most experienced guy you've got in your room. He played in, I think, all but one game last year. I think it's Judge Collier, probably the inside track there. He played a lot as a freshman last year. Experienced kind of the same thing you're just talking about with the offensive line, where having another year will help. Emory Floyd's still in the mix. We've heard Shane Beamer talk about a lot that it's easier to play as a freshman the further you are from the ball, and B, seen it with secondary players the last 2 years. Is this where Jalewis Sullivan just blows everyone away in camp and maybe he's your second corner by week 3? I don't think week 1, but I don't think there's a lot you can really depth chart wise pick at with this defense. I think you kind of about know how it's going to look, but if you did have a spot that second corner is reasonable to question. David Spalding's another guy who's played mostly nickel, but he's got corner in his past. He could slide in there. Experienced guy.
We've heard good things about Bakari Swain.
Yeah. Do you have any? You're already down a guy there because Abari Sandy got hurt in the spring too, so it's a little bit more urgency there. Do you have a thought maybe who you think? Let's just say the first snap against Old Dominion, who's lining up opposite OD?
Probably would go with Judge Collier, like you said. I think he is the most polished of those three, but I think Bakari Swain and maybe Julius Solomon are slightly better natural athletes. I mean, we could even see Bakari Swain maybe returning punts or something, which will be another interesting thing to look for in these coming weeks. So the question is just how much has he developed and how polished is Julius Solomon going to be when he arrives on campus, which he just arrived, in the last week or so.
He wasn't one of the early enrollees. It was over the summer, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, just based on the information that we have a lot more information on Judge Collier, but it wouldn't shock me to see either of those guys make a push. And like you said, I mean, there's some veteran presence there too that maybe isn't quite as talented, but has the the experience in Clayton White's system and all of that too.
Yeah, what you got next?
Yeah, so let's kind of keep pulling that thread. And my overall question, and I think that this just allows us to kind of familiarize everyone with some new names, is what newcomers end up cracking the two deep in general. And yeah, so let's take a minute and you can help me brainstorm, but to talk about some of the portal guys, some of the 2024 guys, maybe a couple of red shirts that South Carolina fans, maybe if they've been checked out since last season, don't know their name and are trying to like start to wrap their head around the roster. We already mentioned one at running back, Rocket Sanders, former Arkansas running back, portaled in. I think let's assume that he stays pretty healthy, but if he needs to be spelled or whatever, you also brought in Oscar Attaway and Jawarren Howell. Oscar Attaway from North Texas, Jawarren Howell from SC State. I think really we'll probably see a mix and match of all three of those guys. If we stay on offense, I think Gage Larvadane is a name we heard a lot coming out of the spring. Miami, Ohio transfer at wide receiver.
I think he's a candidate to return picks too.
Yes, exactly. You mentioned before we hopped on here that there's been some recent buzz around DeLavion Campbell, who is a super senior out of Nevada. He's also, I think, the only wide receiver outside of Nicholas Harbor that's over 6 foot on the roster. So probably has a role around the goal line. Jared Brown is another name we've heard a lot at wide receiver, Coastal Carolina.
Ezekiel Bennett, if you're just talking about receivers that weren't here last year.
Yep. Yeah, and that I mean that's another one of my questions, I guess, is that wide receiver room. You heard me just list off 6 names, and there's another 3 or 4 that could potentially make an impact. Nicholas Harbor is a name that most South Carolina fans are probably familiar with because he was a 5-star and all of that. Also, if you've been playing any of the new NCAA video game, you can definitely see his potential should he be able to develop as a route runner and as a receiver in the open field. I mean, no one's going to catch him. Former track star, or really still current track star, didn't quite make it to the Olympics as a freshman, but we'll see in 4 years. Anyway, so that wide receiver group is going to be a bunch of names that most fans probably aren't familiar with, but it'll be really interesting to see how it all plays out. Other newcomers that you can think of that people should be aware of?
Yeah, a few more. I think Brady Hunt's going to feature a decent bit at tight end. Josh Simon's back, but you lost Trey Knox, so kind of that 2 tight end set stuff that Will Loggins likes to do. You got a hole to fill there. I think Brady Hunt, experienced guy, came in from Ball State. I think fans should know about that. I guess you're kind of hearing back to the freshmen here, but those 3 true freshman offensive linemen coming in state, Josiah Thompson, who I think is the furthest ahead right now, at least from kind of what I've heard and been able to gather, Cam Pringle and Blake Franks, Pringle and Thompson being tackles, Franks projecting more as an interior lineman. I think the case for all 3 of those guys is pretty similar right now. Highly rated, true freshmen. You see how fast they develop. But I think you like the potential with all 3 of those guys.
Yeah. Maybe if we stand along the offensive line, remember that Marquis Anderson redshirted pretty much all of last year after he got injured in the preseason, but he was a highly rated.
Kason Henry's not a new name, but he got hurt literally drive 1 last year.
Yep.
And was the starting right tackle coming out of camp. So that, not technically a new name, but I think counts for this discussion of, familiarizing things.
No, absolutely. If we flip it to the defensive line, not a new name, but maybe surprising if you checked out over the offseason, Gilbert Edmond is back at defensive end after a season in Florida State. Obviously, you have 5-star Dylan Stewart at defensive end, and he seems as advertised from everything that we've heard and seen throughout the offseason. Even, the little bit of glimpses we saw in the spring game. I think he's going to definitely be relied upon in pass rushing a good bit as a freshman. But along those lines, he's not necessarily going to have to be the every down starter because you brought in Kyle Kennard from Georgia Tech. And Edmond, like I said, comes back from Florida State. Any other defensive linemen that...
Dylan Stewart.
Yeah, well, I said that, yeah.
Yeah. You got Stewart. No, I think that's about it. Honestly, I think that's about it in general. We mentioned Julius Solomon
Linebackers.
in the second.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got Bengali Kamara, Demetrius Knighton. Those are your
Yeah.
two transfer linebackers. I think that just depends scheme as much as anything. If you're playing 3-3-5, you're going to see some of those guys more than the 4-2-5. I like Kamara. I think there's a role here for sure for him. Yeah, but I think also Debo is going to play every snap he's healthy, and
Yep.
Bam Martin Scott as well.
Yeah, and
Close to it.
Debo recently named to the Bronco Nagurski watch
Watch
list,
list, yeah.
so that's a nice preseason honor for him. Yeah, I agree. Your two starters at linebacker probably Debo and Ben Martin Scott, but I do think you have good depth, and really that's kind of what I think they did a better job this offseason in the portal maybe than any year prior is you didn't go out and get a ton of flashy names that are going to start week one. You didn't get a Spencer Rattler or what was the tight end that came with him
Austin Stogner.
Austin Stogner, right? Where that makes national headlines. But I do think you did a really good job of shoring up your depth, making sure that if you do have some injuries, the drop off is not as severe as maybe it has been in the past few seasons.
Yeah, I'm going to throw in one more newcomer just because it's what we haven't talked about yet, but it was one of my questions anyway. Who's going to be the kicker? You did lose Mitch Jeter in the portal to Notre Dame. That was, people are going to laugh at that. Oh, you lost the kicker. You find someone else to kick. But like Mitch Jeter was almost automatic. That's not nothing to lose. I think it's probably Alex Herrera, who's now on scholarship and has been on the program for a while. But you got a true freshman, Mason Love, coming in, and yeah, you got a kicker battle in camp this year.
Yeah, I was about to say, as I'm looking through these freshmen that could make an impact, Mason Love comes up. Obviously, Dylan Stewart, who we already mentioned, Jalewis Solomon, maybe, Mazio Bennett, who we already mentioned, and then those offensive linemen. That doesn't mean no other freshmen could make an impact, but those are just some of the names that we're kind of targeting to make a move to maybe be a Nicky Manwari or a Jalen Kilgore or Jalon Kilgore that we saw the past two off seasons kind of make a big move in August and then need to make an impact pretty early on.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing too. Is the caveat with all of this is each of the last 2 years you've had a starter, at least one starter. Last year it was like 3 in the first game get hurt pretty significantly. You got more Bam Martin Scott last year because Mo Kaba got hurt in game 1. You got more. I'm trying to even think who was playing right tackle at some point. Sidney Fugar or whatever, because Case and Henry got hurt in game 1. You got more Jalen Kilgore because Nicky Manwari got hurt in game 1, even though he was back a couple weeks later. Anybody could get hurt as soon as they say play ball on the opener, and that's where the depth comes into play. And you know what? If the wrong injury happens at the wrong spot, you might see a freshman thrown in there pretty quick, whether that's on the offensive line. At linebacker, if something happened to Debo or Bam, one of those transfers would have to play more. Just it's all on the table, but I think definitely defensively you have more depth than you've had, as you said, in any year past under Shane Beamer to kind of withstand that.
Yeah, let's kind of peer into our crystal ball a little bit. But what do you think needs to happen over the next month in order for you to feel like you're going to be able to start strong? And I think we've kind of talked throughout the offseason that, sure, okay, Old Dominion, no disrespect to them, but yeah, that should be a win. But then it very quickly starts to ramp up. You go on the road to Kentucky, which isn't the worst SEC environment to start your first road game, but that's a solid team. And then you have a home game against LSU, which we both have tabbed as winnable, but maybe not likely. But certainly more winnable than maybe some of the October games that we've broken down. And if you want to go back through over the summer, we broke down each game up until Oklahoma, and we're going to keep going a little bit later today. But anyway, what's your, if we're looking to our crystal ball and trying to spin this optimistic story about starting strong, what do you think needs to happen?
I think more than anything else, there's only so much you can get out of a Lenoris or a Rocket before they play. I think in terms of what you can actually accomplish in camp without seeing them against a live opponent in a game setting, You need to feel really good, or at least confident that you've got your 5 best offensive linemen in the 5 best spots for them. I just think back to last year and how immediately that kind of fell apart. You didn't have as much talent last year in the room, obviously, but the 5 you put out there, I guess 6 with the 2 deep because Case Henry got hurt early, but what you had out there against North Carolina was nowhere close to your best offensive line. I think as the year went on, you realized that you got that wrong coming out of camp. That different guys need to be in different spots. You move Vershawn Lee to center. You kick Nick Gargiulo out of center. You kind of put Tree and Trovon Ball in there early. I think you don't have time to wait this year, or you can't afford to not have your best offensive line out there early. If that makes sense, like you think you need to, for lack of a better term, do a better job with the camp evaluation on who your best 5 actually are.
Yeah, and maybe another name to bring up there as far as newcomers that we didn't hit on before is Torricelli Simpkins, who is a transfer from North Carolina A&T. I know if you haven't been paying attention, maybe you roll your eyes and it does summon images of like a Sidney Fugar, who obviously hasn't necessarily shown that he was able to compete on a SEC level. Simpkins was like all American.
MEAC lineman of the year, I believe, was what he ended up winning.
Exactly. So different level. He really didn't just start at a lower level, but excelled at a lower level. Now that's still a big ramp up to the SEC. I don't know that I necessarily would project him as a starter, but I think he could slide in there and at least fill a gap if need be, in a way that you didn't have last season really at all with any veterans on the team.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. No, that's it. Go ahead.
No, I agree with what you said about the offensive line. It kind of all starts up there. I do think the defense is going to be pretty good. Limit your injuries on defense, and I think you feel pretty good about the really the 2 deep at almost every position except for maybe corner, like you said. And then offensively, I think having Rocket Sanders healthy, even though I do believe that the other 2 running backs are pretty good and probably better than anything that you had on the roster last year. Having him healthy is the difference, I think, between like a okay offense and like a maybe above average offense.
Yep. I guess though the thing is with that though, like I said, all you can do is see him practice, at least from our perspective and from a coaching perspective, make sure he's healthy and getting stronger going through practice, but you don't really know until a game comes. Is there I'm kind of flipping the question here, but is there anything that you think can actually be solved in camp, or that needs to be solved in camp, that you don't need an actual game to learn?
I think we'll continue to know who's kind of stepping in at wide receiver.
Yeah.
To me, it sounds like you have a lot of wide receiver 2s, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think you could get by with that and spread the ball around. But I'm interested if anyone does start to elevate out of that as wide receiver 1. Nicholas Harbor did finish his track season a little earlier than expected, which means he got a little bit longer of an off season than expected. He's not in Paris right now, so I do think it'll be really interesting to see if he steps up. Interesting to see how DeLavion Campbell kind of translates to this level. I mean, he made an impact at Nevada for sure. For wide receivers, I think we can start to at least feel out who is going to be depended on in crucial situations by the end of camp. But then a lot of it is, I do think you're going to have to wait till game time. One big question that I still have is how Dowell login system and say Sean Elliott's run philosophy are going to meld. Because last season we saw a pretty heavy reliance, out of necessity, but a pretty heavy reliance on the short passing game to get you out of first down situations with varying degrees of success. So I'll be interested to see just how that philosophy shifts now that you do have maybe the opportunity to lean on some other teams a little bit.
Yeah, I think especially if this offensive line is better, kind of what you think it can be, more talented, then and I think that honestly, you go back to even looking at last season, The Florida game, you had the ball with the lead late and you couldn't close that thing out. The Georgia game, you weren't leading in the fourth quarter, but you were still in it, and it was raining, and you kind of needed to be able to run the ball, and you couldn't do that. That's a great defense, obviously, but you've had games. I even think back to 2 years ago, like an A&M game where you ended up having to prevent a Hail Mary situation because you couldn't run off the clock when you had the ball. Talk about like things that define winning and losing, right? And the margins are going to be small with the schedule. 4-minute offense, 6-minute offense, being able to actually keep drives together and sustain them. That comes back to being able to run the football. And I think you have a chance to be able to, like you said, lean on teams this year if things break the way you're hoping they are and everybody's healthy.
Yeah, speaking of the schedule and the thin margins, about a week ago we put out our staff picks, as we do around this time every offseason. You can check that out on gamecocks.com. If you just scroll back maybe a week ago through Extra News, or just if you Google Gamecocks Scoop Staff Picks 2024, they'll probably show up. You were the most pessimistic of the four of us. You have them going 6-6. I have them going 8-4, which probably is not. I wouldn't put money on that. How about let's put it that way? And it's very dependent on starting strong. So I have them winning at Kentucky and winning at home against LSU. Again, both those things happening, probably, I don't know, where would you put that at like a 10% chance right now? 15%?
Yeah, I was going to say a scale of 1 to 10, like a 1 or a 2.
Yeah, sort of narrow window for that to happen. But yeah, I think that week 2 game against Kentucky, which you also have them winning, is pretty much one of the most crucial games maybe of the Beamer era at this point.
Yeah.
It feels
I'm with you.
It feels like that could either be the start towards whatever the next level of the rebuild is, or the start towards the end, depending on which way that goes.
It's the closest thing you have on your entire schedule to a toss-up, I think. We talked about that already. Go back and listen to the episode we previewed Kentucky. But for that game to come so early, and with both teams breaking in a new quarterback, and also just kind of what that game is, usually low-scoring, physical, 17 points won it last year, and 14 would have won it the year before. Yeah, it's about as big as it comes. I will say, though, with what you predicted, if that happens, like, you're talking about being 4-0 at the first bye week. You're 4-0 when Ole Miss comes to town. You're maybe the story of college football if that actually happens. I don't know. Did you see what Nick Eamon put on Instagram yesterday?
I did. And if you guys aren't familiar, he posted a picture of Antoine Wells in his Ole Miss uniform. What did he call him again? A traitor,
Judas Wells.
Judas Wells. That's what it was. That's clever.
October 5th, which I only bring that up now because you mentioned a 4-0 start going into that Ole Miss game. I mean, I think if you're even 3-1, let's say you split LSU, Kentucky, you're up for that game. And then the flip side of that is obviously, I think you're going to beat Old Dominion, you're going to beat Akron, but if you lose to LSU and Kentucky and you go into Ole Miss 0-2 in the SEC already and without really any kind of signature win or proof of concept, it gets dicey going into October.
Well, that's the thing. You have to at least split Kentucky and LSU because, as we've talked about all offseason, October is brutal. You got Ole Miss, who I think has got the talent to be a top 5 team.
Did you put them in your playoff on your? I don't remember.
I did put them
all
in
12.
My playoff. Yeah,
okay,
I put them in my playoff. Actually, I might have had them going pretty far here if I can look at it real quick. I have them making it to the semifinals before.
Okay, yeah, I remember like our national title picks. I didn't remember how many of us, like, what we did for the whole 1 through 12.
Yeah, so I definitely have Ole Miss and at Bama as a loss, and then I have at Oklahoma as a win, but Texas A&M as a loss, and I bring all that up, and then I have Vandy win, Missouri loss. I bring all that up to make the point that this even if it's a good season, I think it's going to be an up and down season. Yeah. You're breaking in a new quarterback. You have a very brutal schedule that goes through stretches of just like maybe the toughest stretches in the country, like that Ole Miss, Bama, Oklahoma, Texas A&M stretch has got to be one of the worst to face in the country. So even if you do exceed expectations this year, be patient. Like it's going to, I don't think anyone's going to project 10 wins for South Carolina or whatever. I don't think this team's ready for that yet. Um, so just wait till the end of the season to kind of figure things out. Although I will say, if you lose at Kentucky and home against LSU, maybe you do start to panic a little bit just because of what's left on the schedule after that.
I think that's fair, especially when you you think about the fact that you're going to be 2-2 going into that first bye, but your wins are going to be Old Dominion and Akron. Yeah, I can't argue with that. And you mentioned A&M there. That's next on the schedule previews. You want to get into the Aggies a little bit here?
Yeah, so like I said, we've been doing game by game previews, and then I've also done written versions on gamecockscoop.com if you prefer to look at things that way. Next up for us is Texas A&M, and then we'll probably do 2 at a time for the next couple of weeks to knock them out before the season starts.
Worth mentioning, by the way, that A&M game is after your second bye and at home, so you might be beat up coming out of October, but you got 2 weeks to get ready for A&M.
Definitely got a gift there on the timing of the bye. Well, really both buys, because you get the first bye before that October stretch that we've talked about that's so brutal: Ole Miss, Alabama, Oklahoma, and then you get your second bye right after that stretch to kind of gear up for the end of the season.
A&M plays LSU the week before, for if anybody was curious.
So, that could help you, and nice little rivalry they've developed in that one. So for those of you that are not sure what has been going on at A&M, they look a little bit different than they did over the last couple of years. They got rid of Jimbo Fisher, and they're paying him, I don't know, like $80 million to sit on the couch or whatever. And they brought on Mike Elko, who was a former defensive coordinator there and then has been the head coach at Duke the last 2 years, really kind of overachieved at Duke, sort of. I mean, 2 years ago, they won 9 games. Last year, they won 6 games. I think the jury's still out on whether or not he did a really good job year one with someone else's players, or if he is ready to like build a program like Texas A&M. But I do think one thing that is for sure is his defensive prowess mixes really well with Texas A&M's roster, which brings back almost everyone on a pretty elite defense, and even brought in the Purdue transfer Nick Scourton, who led the Big Ten in sacks last season, to join the defensive front. So I think your front 6 or so for Texas A&M are going to be scary good. I think they're going to wreak havoc on a lot of quarterbacks throughout the year this year.
Yeah, I think you can already look at it. Obviously not even Duke, but like even looking at Mike Elko's past all the way, the time he spent at Notre Dame and things like that. This is already going to be, even in year one, the most talented defense he's ever coached, probably. That I would say that goes back to when he was on A&M staff, early Jimbo Fisher years, and then obviously when he was on Notre Dame staff, and they had a pretty good team too that year. I think they won 10 games. It's already the most talented defense he's ever had to work with, and then you add that to his scheme and kind of the way he draws things up defensively. They're going to say, I think you can say a lot of the things we said about South Carolina, honestly, and what we said about Oklahoma, too, in the last episode. They're going to stay in a lot of games. Their defense is going to keep them in the fight. I like Connor Wegman. I think he has a chance to kind of push upper tier SEC quarterbacks. He's coming off an injury, but you've got, honestly, it kind of sets up similar to South Carolina, where you've got a quarterback with some promise but some questions, and a defense you feel pretty good about. It's a more talented version of South Carolina, maybe just by star ratings and everything. Do you want to call it that?
I think that's a good way to put it. Similarly, they have a running back that should be good. With Rocket Sanders, obviously, he's proven it at the college level that he is good. It's just a matter of, can he be back to 100% after the injury? With Texas A&M, they have sophomore Ruben Owens, who was the number 1 rated running back in the 2023 class coming out of high school. But he hasn't, made that impact at the college level yet, but certainly seems to have the profile to do so. And then, like you said, Connor Wegman started really strong in 2023, but then had a season-ending injury. But assuming he gets back to the way that he started, should have a really good year. You also added Colin Klein as the offensive coordinator from Kansas State, obviously also former Kansas State quarterback.
He's a Heisman finalist in 2012.
I mean, that was a fun year. I remember that.
That was a good year. That was, I thought Oregon was going to win it that year. Anyway, we're all old.
Yeah, South Carolina probably the best team in school history that year too. So,
Yep.
And they had that flu game against Florida, and that we know how that turned out. Anyway, a couple more names to kind of point out for Texas A&M. Moose Muhammad II. So that makes me feel old as well.
Speaking of
I
old,
remember
yeah.
watching. Yeah, I remember watching his dad with the Carolina Panthers as a kid. But yeah, so he should step up after a year in the program. And then they have two pretty good pass catching tight ends in Donovan Green and Trey Watson. And then, like you said, kind of briefly a second ago, the roster is littered with 4 and 5 star talent, which is a reason that Jimbo Fisher doesn't have a job right now, because there's been a lot of questions about how you couldn't make all of that talent work together. We'll see if Mike Elko has a little bit more luck there, but defensively they're going to be stifling regardless, so they should be in pretty much every ball game they play.
Yeah, it's another one of those there where, again, like, if you're talking about getting to 6 wins, like if we're having these kinds of conversations about a bowl game or even going beyond that, you talk about 8 wins, like, and I think A&M objectively is middle of the pack SEC. I think that's fair to say. You might have them upper middle, lower middle, but like they're not one of the worst 5 or 6 teams, and I probably think anyone's got them in a top 5 or 6. Like a middle of the pack team in the league at home, coming off a bye week. Like I'm not gonna. I don't know if I pick South. I think I did pick South Carolina winning that game, but like if you're talking about paths to 6 wins and like ways you can get to a bowl game, like this is kind of tilting towards the side you feel like you need.
Yeah, the way I looked at it was you got to win this one or Mizzou probably.
Yeah,
to
we'll talk about that next episode.
Really kind of push it to the next level. I think actually on the staff picks I picked them to lose, but then when I did the prediction, I picked them to win. So I don't know, but that's kind of what I mean. Is it feels like one that you could win, but if you win, you're probably gonna like lose to Mizzou or something. Or it feels like one you could lose and everyone panics, and then you turn around and beat Mizzou. I don't. It feels like a weird part of the schedule that I don't know how it fully shakes out. But because there's a bye week before Texas A&M, and it's a home environment, I think I gave that one the edge over the Missouri game.
Yeah, I like the odds better in that one. Schedules. I mean, we know what it is. It's brutal. It's tough. You're gonna have to scrap to find your wins. And I don't want anyone to like clip this and think I'm saying South Carolina is a lock to beat A&M. This is a gimme on the schedule. This is the warm up for Vanderbilt. But when you start to stack this up against an Ole Miss or an Alabama, or even going to Norman the game before this, like it's in your building. It's off a bye. It's first year of a new coach. Like if you're talking about going to a bowl game, like I think this is the kind of conversation you need to have.
Absolutely. And also, if we're talking strength on strength a little bit, or strength on weakness, I guess, Texas A&M has struggled along the offensive line the past few years. It doesn't seem like they've added any crucial pieces that are immediately going to change anything there, other than just them getting 1 year older and all of that. And I think South Carolina's defensive front is going to be a little more stout this year than it has been. So, maybe some opportunities there to cause some turnovers, to wreak some havoc of your own. And then defensively for Texas A&M, their secondary is probably the only weak spot. So if you can protect Lenore Sellers long enough for him to get some balls off and stuff, maybe you can hit some big plays. I definitely think it's going to be a low-scoring game regardless of how it all plays out.
That trends a little bit more towards rock fight. And you got to be up and find a way to win some of those. And that, again, is maybe this is where we wrap it up. Goes back to what I'm talking about earlier about the small margins in these games and the ability to run the football and salt away a game with a fourth quarter drive that hasn't been there for a lot of the time the last 2 years that you hope you have. And I would venture to say you need to have this year, breaking in a new quarterback.
Yeah, I think that's right. So we'll have plenty more football talk throughout the next month, and plenty of stuff on GamecockScoop.com coming out of today's media day and the first couple of days of practice. So definitely keep your eyes on that. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's Gamecock Scoop or Rivals Gamecock or wherever you're watching, because we'll have probably a couple of clips here and there that we can grab from practice and whatever else we can post up there. Do you have just a second to talk some summer basketball?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So earlier this week, that was Tuesday, South Carolina had an open session for the media. which you were able to attend. What can you tell us about the way that the 2024-25 men's basketball team looks like? Maybe some notes about who you might project as starters and some of the newcomers as well for those that have checked out since last season.
I think it's obvious after watching 1 hour of one practice, they're going to the final. No, I'm just kidding. All right. We did get to watch an open practice. It was mostly skill work. They did a little bit of 5-on-5 at the very end, maybe it was 2 different games of 5-on-5 that was 5 minutes each. So I wrote about that, kind of wrote about the lineup combinations. If you're subscribed, that's on the website now. I think my biggest takeaway that I got from watching both kind of some of the skill stuff they were doing and also a little bit of 5-on-5 we did see is they're going to run their offense through the post. That's just where the talent on this roster is. Not only do you have bigs you feel really good about, and Colin Murray-Boyles might be a lottery pick, Nick Pringle's on a Final Four team last year, Jordan Butler's a 7-footer. You've got bigs who can handle the ball. Colin Murray-Boyles looks really good as a passer. He looks even better than he did last year. Nick Pringle's good with the ball. He makes good decisions. I think Butler's the same way. You can run your offense kind of more inside out. You can do some elbow stuff. We saw a lot of that, throw the ball into the elbow and either the big makes a decision or kind of hands it back out to a guard on the curl. I think you saw where the strength of the roster is and kind of what they're going to be able to play through. I think you still have the 3-point shooting. You go ahead.
I was just going to say, just along that note with those guys, something that we're hoping to see or hope develops, I guess, this offseason for Colin Murray-Boyles is a little bit more ability to step back and take a jump shot. Did you see any of that?
A little bit. Saw him hit 1-3. I think someone else got a video. It's on Twitter. He looks comfortable playing 15, 20 feet from the basket. I think that's a game where you get to more I'm not going to say point forward stuff where LeBron's 6'10" playing point guard, that kind of thing, but
sure.
A big who can handle the ball and distribute it. I think you're going to see more of that. And like you said, the shots that come with it. I don't think this is going to be quite as much of I don't think you're loaded from 3-point range. You still have Miles Studi back, but you lose Michi Johnson. That's going to be hard to replace. Yeah, I would say skewing big was my takeaway. And then from the new guys, I will say, I like the build and kind of the frame from Arden Conyers and what we saw. He looks bigger. He looks stronger. Obviously, he took a redshirt year last year. He was accelerating off the dribble a little bit. He was getting into some good areas. I don't know what that means in terms of playing time or what that's going to look like, but I saw the benefits of a redshirt year just from some of the physical tools that we got to see in 1 hour on the court, put it that way.
Right. And then, of course, the other big question is Cam Scott, who was a late addition, stole him away from Texas. I think some of that was showing the proof of making the NCAA tournament this past year, what is building at the program for Lamont Paris, and able to convince him to stay home. Lexington kid, obviously, probably expected to make an offensive impact really as a freshman.
Yeah, I don't think we've talked about this before, and I kind of saw it with my own eyes on Tuesday, but I don't think the weight's quite there yet to maybe take guys on off the dribble or definitely not doing any of the bang and crash stuff. And he might have some problems defensively, kind of in the way Morris Ugasuk did at times last year when he was, kind of getting up to college weight and stuff. But the shot's there. The playmaking's there. I saw him, I think he hit 2 threes in the little 5-on-5 we saw at the end. Even if he's at the point now where he's spot up shooting and maybe playing a little bit of 2 guard, some off ball, that's still a helpful addition to your offense. And then if the defense and the off the dribble and, kind of that sort of creativity comes in year 2, you still have a pretty good player, I think, this year.
Yeah. So it sounds like, should be really interesting to see how it all plays out. But even if it's a little bit of a different look, I think Lamont Paris has kind of bought some goodwill with the fan base at this point to kind of figure it out.
For sure.
Definitely bought some goodwill, I think, with us that analyze things, that he is going to be able to figure it out. So when is SEC media days for all of that, like November-ish?
It's actually on the football bye week, which works out well. It's October, the second bye week. It's October 20 whatever day between Oklahoma and A&M. It's October 20 something. I have it written down somewhere.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, obviously we'll have some coverage as all of that plays out. And as I said a couple weeks ago, I doubt that they're going to be picked 14th or 16th or
16th now, yeah.
There are. at this point. So, all right. Well, we will have full coverage of the first couple of practices on GamecockScoop.com. We'll be back here next week to start to talk about what we're hearing out of that, any injury news, any sort of updates to the depth chart that we can kind of figure out. Make sure you subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple Music, we're on all of the things. And we also have these on YouTube, like I said, at Rivals Gamecock. Until next time, this has been the GamecockScoop.com podcast. We'll see you.